into this. So again, today we're really excited to welcome Wes Blakesley, Kelsey Weigel, and Hestia Mellard to join us for this career panel. Again, quick refresher, the participants here today are either PhD students nearing the end of their training or postdocs who are interested in industry careers. And so the goal for this program is to really help them refine that process of figuring out not just that industry is something they're interested in, but within industry, what are they interested in, right? Now, both the variety of different positions and then also differences between different sized companies and things like that. And so that's why we're so excited to welcome our panelists today to talk about their experiences in industry and provide a little more of that insight. And so we really do want to leave this to be participant driven in terms of kind of the questions so that we're getting at the things you're really interested in asking. We have some questions to get started, but then if people want to just ask questions in the chat, that's probably the easiest thing. So if there's something you want to ask, go ahead and type that in the chat, and then we can ask the panelists to address that. So with that, I think we're going to start just by asking our panelists just to give a very brief intro to kind of, your name and then your training and short history to kind of where you got to where you're at today. And if it's helpful, since Wes was here first, maybe Wes, why don't you start?
Yeah, I'll go first. Wes Blakesley, I did my PhD in pharmacology. I defended my thesis in October of 2015. Prior to that, I went to CU Boulder for undergraduate and did biochemistry there. Worked in an integrative physiology lab for a gap year just to make sure that research was what I wanted to do, and turned out at the time it was absolutely the right decision. As I was kind of transitioning out of academia, I actually did an intern with Inga Vifas in her program. Bruce, she's still the associate dean of the grad school, right?
Yeah, she's still here. Yep.
Right. And so Inga had a program that basically gave me some funding and some credit to do for a course, an elective course in my PhD work, to do an internship. And basically through a lot of networking and shaking hands that I was not good at as a graduate student, I found a gig at RX Review, which is a health information technology and based in downtown Denver. And ever since then, I've been in the health IT space, evidence-based medicine, clinical decision support, medication adherence, and the pharmacy value chain. So now I'm with a medication adherence startup called PatchRx. And we build these little devices that go underneath the caps of prescription drugs, and we can actually measure how often patients are interacting with their medications and get that last mile of what we call it, medication adherence data.
Okay, thank you. Hestia, and am I pronouncing that correctly? I apologize if I'm not.
No, yeah, that is correct. Hestia. It's actually from Greek mythology. And you got it right. So Hestia Mellard, I currently work at Bioscience, which is a company that main laboratories are based in Boulder, but we also have some satellite laboratories. And currently the company is a developer and also commercializes diagnostic testing, mostly for patients that have either suspicious nodules or already have been diagnosed with lung cancer. But we can talk more about the other things that I get to do as someone in that industry as well, including working with pharma on developing diagnostics as companions to new drugs that are coming on market, etc. So how did I get to Bioscience? Well, I started out in a PhD program on the East Coast at University of Pennsylvania, and then I moved out to beautiful Boulder, as many people probably have, to really enjoy the great outdoors, and also to pursue a postdoc with Joaquin Espinoza when he was still on the Boulder campus, and now, of course, he's at Anschutz. And I did I did my postdoc for about 5 years. And then I really was at a point where I wanted to see how I could use what I'd learned in academia and through my training to really have a more direct impact on medicine and healthcare. And so I started to look in the area for different types of opportunities to apply those molecular biology techniques and my understanding of cancer signaling and things like that, and found through connections an opportunity at Biodesix as a scientist, and since then have kind of rose through the ranks and become more in a managerial position and more focused on the holistic view of how to develop a product rather than just specifically the molecular biology of the assay itself. So happy to talk more about any of those or all of those things as we get into the discussion.
Great, thank you. Kelsey.
Sure.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I'm Kelsey Weigel. I am currently at Invitae, although most of you have probably heard the company that we were before, ArcherDX. That company is based up in Boulder, but we have actually just been purchased by Invitae, which is a large public company based in California. So we've got 2 satellite labs now here, one in Boulder, one in Golden, Colorado, and then we've got sites kind of across the country and world as well as part of Invitae. So my career kind of kicked off back in my PhD work studying molecular signaling and cancer biology. I defended that thesis in October of 2015. Then I transitioned over to Anschutz, where I went and did a postdoc for a couple years in Jiaojing Wang's lab. And I worked with her studying kind of an extension of what I was doing in my PhD, largely focused on protein signaling and looking at tumor microenvironment contributions to cancer. During that time and sort of during the PhD as well, I knew that I'd want to move into the industry in some capacity. And so I really used a lot of my time as a postdoc to do extensive networking. I think I was in Bruce's office all the time trying to understand how to do that well. But I feel like I'm now possibly a poster child for him because I followed his advice to a T. But that did land me a job with Flagship Biosciences here locally. It's based in Westminster. I was there working as a clinical, it was called a scientist, but it was a sort of a clinical liaison type role. And that was a great fit for me because what I wanted to do was be able to think about science all day, but not have to do it at the bench. I was more than ready to move off the bench during my postdoc for sure. So transitioned into that role as my first position in industry. From there was recruited over to ArcherDX to build out what they were calling was their clinical services liaison role. It was a new position in the company. Clinical services were a new offering. And because I kind of had that foundation from Flagship, I was able to move over and support that pretty well at Archer. And then recently I took a new role over in diagnostic strategy as a project manager, looking to drive forward one of our new products to commercialization. So kind of moving through, had a couple of different types of roles. I'm happy to answer any questions about those various roles I've had.
Hey, thank you all for that great introduction. And so, I had one of those, the first questions here as we're kind of getting started it was going to be, how did you choose your career path? But I think that's a bad question. I think the question I'd like to ask to start things is, how did you make the choice about the first position? When you left academia and you were looking for, is it an industry scientist position, or is it something like Kelsey was just saying, the clinical sciences away from the bench? What was most important for you in making that first decision about the position outside of academia? So I'll ask that question. Maybe we'll start with Kelsey on that one. How did you know that was the right kind of gig for you?
Yeah, definitely. So while I was doing all that networking, I was kind of trying to see for myself, big picture, where did I want to end up and what was kind of my tenure goal, I guess, as sort of like a trajectory I wanted to get onto, because I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I don't think anybody ever does, but my idea was just, in general, I wanted to be able to contribute to large business making decisions while having the science drive those decisions. I felt strongly that a lot of companies that are a scientific product company have a lot of interesting science, but then they maybe have somebody that has an MBA in the position of driving their company forward. And so while they really understand the business and have the business acumen, they don't understand at the end of the day the science behind it. And I think it's really important for scientific companies to have somebody in an upper level that really gets the science and can help drive business and define better product based on sort of that science as the root cause. That's why you have a business. That's what you should drive with, is what my opinion is. So I spent a long time interviewing around trying to find somebody that felt the same way and trying to understand what their job was, and ultimately ran into a vice president of strategic business diagnostics. And her role I thought was very fascinating. It was kind of the path I wanted to be on. She did exactly what I just described. She had a PhD herself, but she was now in an executive leadership role where she did drive business on science. And so I found that to be super interesting, and she became a really important mentor for me, just kind of describing her workflow, her path to get to where she was at the time, and tried to find myself the entry role that would kind of set me up for that. So her advice to me was to find somewhere that was either in the commercialization or manufacturing space, or some liaison type role, because that would really set you up to show you're a good communicator, that you can speak on any level to any audience about the science, and still be able to sort of get your hands in some of the business and understand how business is driven from just an operational perspective, as well as understanding product definitions to know, where to push that. So really started just then canvassing the network for what is a liaison role besides medical sciences liaison, because I hadn't heard of anything except for that. And found in the industry the naming of job titles is hugely a misnomer in most cases. The role I took at Flagship, as I mentioned, was called scientist, but it had nothing to do with bench work. So really started digging in and trying to learn sort of the different words or phrases or titles that they might have in industry and where I could fit. And was able to network and find that first position as a scientist, but really more of a liaison role there. And that's kind of how I jumped in, but really trying to see big picture and then what I needed to do to take baby steps to get there.
Great. So this, Hestia, it's kind of hard, I think, because you're on the phone. So I don't know if it's easier just to call you out as it goes. I'd like, the three of you just to kind of bounce back and forth with this. So maybe you can go now. We'll just go reverse order, and then we can figure it out going forward.
Yeah. I'm not terribly shy, so I'll absolutely speak up when I think there's something that I can add. In this particular situation, I think Kelsey, had a very nice description of how she came about where she is now. I think mine has been a little bit less maybe defined and active, which I'm not sure is a good thing or a bad thing. I would say for me, I got to a point where I, like Kelsey, didn't want to be on the bench necessarily doing real basic research anymore. It wasn't so much I didn't want to be at the bench, but I wanted to be able to see what I was doing had impact, like I said, just directly to healthcare. So I think for me, I started out on the bench when I moved to industry at Bioscience. They were bringing on some molecular tests to look at tumor mutations in liquid biopsy or in blood samples, right? So solid tumors can shed nucleic acid that can provide information about that tumor in the blood. And so they need someone with that expertise to come in and really be at the bench and develop some of these new assays, because it wasn't necessarily their focus before then. So I jumped on the opportunity, not really knowing and that much about what it would be like and whether or not I would fit into industry. But sometimes you got to just take the chance. I think a lot of us don't necessarily know what we want to do when we grow up. Maybe we never will. So it's just about sometimes taking a chance and trying something different and new.
Alrighty, is that my turn now? I could not agree more with, and as frustrating as it might be for all of you students and postdocs on the phone, it is the case that a lot of times you just kind of stumble upon where you end up becoming, and you don't have kind of a defined path. So I could not agree more with I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, but I can walk everybody kind of through the progression of how I got into health IT and digital health. Bruce, really quick, is everyone here at the Anschutz campus, or are there others at the Boulder campus too?
No, everybody here is at Anschutz.
Okay, so just from an Anschutz type perspective, one thing that I thought was a big strength of doing my PhD at Anschutz was because you have access to all the hospital infrastructure there too, not just your research infrastructure. And so, I was very interested in pharmacology, and my lab was in the division of cardiology at the campus, and so I actually got to go to the operating room and harvest actual human donor hearts directly in the exam room. And while I was in there, I got to experience a lot of clinical workflows of how do physicians talk to one another, who all is in the room, what kind of technology do they actually use to perform their tasks. And the one universal thing that all physicians agreed on is how much they hated their electronic medical record. And which is kind of scary at the time, right? But I got to witness a lot of that, and through my connections at the Division of Cardiology, and I just volunteered. I just said, "Hey, I'll go at 4 a.m. when you have a donor heart coming, and we'll harvest the left ventricle, right ventricle, left atrium, right atrium, septum, and freeze them, and so we can use them for biochemical analysis later." My clinical mentor too, which this also isn't like a traditional life science path, but I did have a clinical mentor in my PhD too, who's a pediatric cardiologist and heart transplant surgeon. And so she would bring me around, and I would just round with her, because eventually I was interested in translating medicine from the lab bench to the bedside. It's kind of all of our, goals, right? Is we want our research to contribute to something that eventually reaches patients, especially if you're in the life science phase. And so those two things really gave me that kind of clinical aspect that I was interested in, but also some unbelievable infrastructure that is at the Anschutz campus is the ability to go see the best people in the world talk about what the best treatments are for certain diseases. So you have cardiology grand rounds, you have neurology grand rounds, you have nephrology grand rounds, endocrinology grand rounds, oncology grand rounds. You guys probably all know pizza talks, right? Like if they're still there, but I'm telling you, if you're showing up just for the pizza, you're selling yourself short. Really listen to what they're saying, because, if you want to know what the biggest treatment is for, non-small cell lung cancer, like the best experts in the world are there for free, giving you all that knowledge firsthand, and you can ask them questions about how these new drugs are hitting the market. It's an incredible resource. And I didn't tell my PI that I was doing that, because he would have told me I couldn't do that. So maybe I'm being a rebel, but I was just like, you know what, I'm going to do this for my own professional development because I wanted to, and I wanted to use the resources that Anschutz gave me for that. But then after that, I became really passionate about not just developing new medicine, but the medicine that we have in our markets today is not well utilized. And so what can we do on a technology side to make that better? And so because I went and sat in all of those, grand rounds for over 3.5 years, I got to see all different areas of medicine and learn about different kinds of medicine and how they're used, but also talk to clinicians about their workflow. And I'm like, well, why are our diabetes numbers so bad if we know how to treat it so well? And then, just ask them point blank and just be the dumb kid in the room. Like, I'm the poor little student, like, can you educate me, please? But then, so I knew I wanted to go into tech. And at the time in 2014 and 2013, there was a big digital health boom of companies moving to Denver. And part of that stemmed from like the Prime Health initiative. And I don't know if any of you have heard of Catalyst HTI. It's a brand new building in I don't know if it's brand new anymore. It's probably 3 years old in the Rhino district downtown, but it is a health tech incubator. And so basically everyone that was involved with the building of Catalyst and, bringing those companies to town, I went to all of their networking events and basically just shook hands awkwardly and finally found a company that I found a good fit for, and started as an intern while I was in graduate school, and then became a full-time employee and actually worked my way up to the C-suite of that company, because I was employee number 7 when we started, and when I left, we were at 50. So I got to see the whole progression of that company from a very young, small startup into an actual functioning business. So that was kind of where I went. Hey,
so I'd love it if people have questions. You can add, because everybody knows that I will talk and ask questions if nobody else does. So anybody want to ask a question right now? You can unmute yourself if you do.
I see Tyler. Yeah.
Yeah, so I totally have a question. I guess this could be for anyone on the panel here. But one of the things that, I'm starting to think about as I think I'm within a year of graduating here, certainly considering going into industry, obviously. One of the questions that I have is, like, as many of us are at a similar stage and we're becoming more and more niche experts on the subtopic of our dissertation, and where that started from a very broad base, maybe year 2, and is now at some very, very niche level. As you mentioned, you were doing a lot of grand rounds, Wes, but I guess to all of you, to what extent, like, moving into industry, did you find that you had to sort of back up and move more towards some generalized, to some degree, long settled science or settled medicine, as well as some of the newer burgeoning frontiers, but to a much less extent than, like, the nitty gritties of, like, the newest, latest thing that probably won't become a therapeutic for another maybe half decade based on, many other researchers confirming it, and eventually it getting picked up by some pharma, and then yada, yada, yada. To what extent did you feel like you had to sort of almost regress your knowledge base a little bit and diversify and spread out to, like, really become just, like, agile and less of a, I can tell you everything you want to know about this one protein that, most people aren't going to find relevant?
Don't sell yourself short. I think I had that same feeling when I was trying to transition to industry. And a couple of times I can say for sure that I didn't apply to a job specifically because I read the job description. I thought to myself, well, that's not exactly what I know about, right? And even the job that I ended up getting, it took me a couple of weeks to apply because there were some things in the job description that I felt like, oh, that's not my niche. And in the end, I really would have done myself a disservice, because it turns out that the job description, 1, didn't actually describe everything they were looking for. And 2, you have a lot of experiences and knowledge just from going through the process of getting a technical PhD that go a lot beyond knowing about one specific protein and everything you could possibly know about it. So just try to think a little bit more broadly about already what you know that can help you make that transition.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'll say pretty much the same thing in a different way. Transferable skills are huge. And so you going on and getting a PhD means you have a lot of transferable skills already. You just really are drilled into your mind of that one way to apply it to this one particular pathway that you happen to be the best in the world at knowing, right? Best advice I ever got in grad school was through a career development program called PhD, and the guy came in and he was just like, you have a PhD, that means you are the best in the world at something, which means you can become the best in the world at something else. And so using all of those skills that you have, you can actually apply them because you have all the knowledge and the ability of being able to become that expert. You can do it again. The one other thing to think about too is, there is a big use in life sciences. If you really enjoy bench work, let's say like you're a structural biologist and you use an FPLC every single day and you know exactly how to purify a certain protein. You need people like that in the field to create the reagents that you're using in life sciences, right? And you already have a job waiting for you that you don't know about because you're an expert at an FPLC. or a mass spec or a qPCR machine or some sort of technical skill that you already have. Like if you're really good at cloning too, you know, like especially with, if you're good at CRISPR, if you're good at, you know, high throughput screening, all of that stuff can be applied to an industry position too. So you can do both. I would just say it depends on what you're really passionate about. And if you really are passionate about bench work, there is a place for you with that technical skill set that you have. If you're not, use the transferable skills that you already have.
I'll add to that a little bit. And also looks like Josh typed in a question about skills gained during the academic training. So I can kind of combine an answer for that. I agree with what Wes and Hestia said for like extensively. I mean, I think in any career, you're going to have to be able to communicate and prove that you can talk to any audience in any setting. And I actually did use my PhD thesis work in presentations to get my postdoc and in presentations to get my job in my first industry position. And it's because you have to understand how to take that highly specialized bit of information and not talk over your audience in the room. And so you still have to be the expert, you still have to be able to answer questions, but you still have to be able to communicate on a level that anyone in the room is going to understand. And something that it didn't occur to me before I left academia is that you get so surrounded by people that are just like you when you're in your PhD and your postdoc, and everybody is at your same level and they all have advanced degrees and they all specialized in some weird one niche thing. And so you can talk to each other because you're on the same level, but then you jump outside of that and you get people of all backgrounds and all technical levels. And so my first position, I worked with people that had a high school diploma, a bachelor's degree, all the way through a PhD or an MD. And so when you step out of that, you have to be able to communicate that level of knowledge to the right audience at any time. And I since then have not worked with a set of all upper level degree folks ever again. In my space, it's a mixed bag every time. And so the ability for you to know your information well and be the technical expert in the room is invaluable no matter where you are, because you'll walk in with that PhD and be the one that they're going to all turn to and be like, hey, I don't understand what this is. Is there a paper? Is there something? And you've learned the skill set to go and just read any paper and understand and digest it and be able to get back a summary pretty quick. Nobody else in the room is going to be able to do that if you're the one that has that advanced level degree. So I don't know about you guys, but when I started my PhD, like it was mind-numbing reading a published paper that was outside my expertise. I would sit for hours trying to just find the relevant takeaway. And by the end, I could just get through like couple figures, read the figures, take the final conclusions paragraph, and be able to walk away with like a full dissertation to somebody if I needed to, because you just learn a different way of thinking and digesting information. And that skill in itself, to Hestia's point, don't sell yourself short. That matters immensely in the field, especially if you go into an industry where there's going to be all kinds of skill sets and levels from all different areas of, very diverse space. And so I think as far as the question that Josh posted here, what skills did you learn? I think the skills of just digging through information and pulling that key takeaway quickly and readily and be able to communicate to anyone on any level, whether it's a deep technical conversation or just a quick high level takeaway your grandma could understand, I think was a hugely important skill. And then just being able to know your audience and communicate appropriately were skills that definitely honed in academia, but are skill sets that are actually setting you apart once you go into industry, because that's just not how other people have learned and how they've been trained and how they approach situations.
So I want to take a quick second here to introduce Andrew Hadd and give Andrew a chance to just say hi to the group. So Andrew, thanks for joining us. If you would give just a quick little introduction to your career path from how you went for your PhD to where you got now, then we'll get back to some of these other questions in the chat.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll go as quick as possible. So hi everyone, my name's Andrew Hadd, and yeah, so I knew Bruce and Cheatham. I used to work with Cheatham back at CU Innovations. So my current role now is I work also with Kelsey at Invitae. So I work in their partner management group and helping manage partnerships between Invitae and outside groups for diagnostic development. But as Bruce was saying, in terms of like kind of how I landed in here where I'm at today, is just kind of very kind of piecemeal way. So I have my PhD is in biochemistry and molecular biology from Oregon Health and Science University. And then right after that, I worked for a CLIA molecular diagnostics lab focusing on inherited disease diagnostics and doing assay development for individuals with rare inherited disorders using next-gen sequencing. And then worked in academic tech transfer offices. One back up in the Pacific Northwest, and then Cheatham and I worked at CU Innovations together for about 2 years, or at least I was there for about 2 years. And where we worked on the Spark Colorado program, the biotech accelerator. And so for me, in terms of kind of my progression, it was very academic to kind of arm's length academic clinical hospital research lab, then into tech transfer, which you're at the cusp between academia and industry, and then in the role that I'm in now is full on within the industry. So yeah, happy to address questions. And then sorry I'm late. I had a couple other meetings that I had to deal with right before this, and but Bruce and Cheatham have my email, so they feel free to pass that contact, and I can address questions.
Yeah, thank you for that, and no worries. So I'm actually going to combine a couple questions from the chat to pose this one, because one question was, do you like your current position? And then another question coming in, which is really talking about kind of the work-life balance, those kinds of things. So my question then, I think from that is thinking about positions in academia to positions in industry. What is that lifestyle like? It comparable, like it more, like it less, whatever it is. So thinking about going from an academic environment, academic careers to the lifestyle, having an industry career, what's your perspective and take on that? And we're just kind of bouncing around so people can jump in as they go.
I'll go rapid fire, comparing academia to industry. You have less freedom of innovation because you're trying to build a product, right? And you're trying to sell that product. That product is what keeps your company's lights on. But you do have a lot more responsibility and flexibility too. As far as where you can move and what you can do. Work-life balance, it all depends on how much you travel. Let's say, for me, I work from home because I work for a tech company. And I only travel to certain conferences at handful of times a year. If you're a medical science liaison, at least pre-COVID, you're knocking on physicians' doors every single day out on the road, actually talking to people about your company's drugs. And so it totally depends on what kind of role what kind of role you find yourself in.
Yeah, maybe another compare and contrast. We said this earlier, but the difference between being around a whole bunch of people that know exactly the same type of information at pretty much the same depth of knowledge as you do, to being in an environment where you're an expert on a specific thing and you're around the table with a whole bunch of other people that have different expertise. And I found that to be so rewarding and enjoyable. I get to learn about business, about marketing, about how IT implementation happens. How do we manage our inventory? All these other things that, are actually really interesting and complex problems to solve. And at the same time, get to be kind of the teacher when it comes to how does this assay actually work? Why do we need these inventory items and things like that, for example. So you get to interact with a lot of different types of people in industry.
Okay, so thank you for that. I actually, I want to get to Walter's question because I think it's really good and it's one that is on a lot of people's minds, which is how did you know it was time to leave? How did you know you were ready to leave academia? And so part of that question is, did you feel like there was some professional benchmark you were trying to hit before you were ready to go, or did you just say enough is enough? So how did each of you decide it was time to leave academia?
So I can jump in. So for me, it was very kind of like a staged process. And as I kind of just kind of gave my spiel a little bit ago, it was something early, actually, when I was in grad school, and I wasn't even looking for kind of a quote traditional postdoc. And so, and then also when I was in grad school, I also took a technology commercialization entrepreneurship class, and that's what really kind of got me interested in, working in industry. And so for me, it was each position that I have since grad school, it was to pick up a new an extra skill, an extra layer, an extra quiver in my, in my tool chest to make myself, ready for the industry itself. And I think one of the key things that I learned, at least in my previous role, is also, and this is I think what Wes was just getting into, is how do you define product and what it takes to actually get an idea and then turn it into a product, because that's ultimately what industry is looking for. And so appreciating understanding what a market is, how do you put a product around it, and then at least in healthcare, it's all in a regulated environment. So then what are the regulatory implications and the clinical trials that would be needed to then actually now truly translate that tech into a product. But I guess to address the question, it was very staged, and it was very, trying to pick up a new skill such that I could be then ready for an industry position. That being said, I didn't go from, a wet bench industry position into a straight into industry. It was pick up some business skills, and then kind of went straight into more of kind of a kind of more business hybrid scientific role.
So one of you other ones somebody's got to jump in and say, how did you know? This is this burning question, man. I hear it all the time. So how did you know you were ready to go?
Kelsey, you should go, and then I'll go after, because I have a very strong opinion on this one.
Okay, I don't know if I do. My opinion was just year 2.5 of my PhD, I was like, I'm out. I don't want to do bench research anymore. I appreciate it, but I don't want to do it. I don't have any regrets. Someone asked that question. No regret. Not ever wanting to go back. I don't think a door is closed, though. I think if I chose to, I could go back in. There's always going to be interest to find a bench role. And I think academia is one place, but it's not the only place. I mean, I think there's so many places that are biotech, bioresearch startups. I mean, there's anywhere, if you want to get back to the bench, that you have that opportunity. It doesn't have to be getting back into academia specifically, if you will. I actually, my path was frustrating because when I was in my PhD and I did not want to be at the bench anymore, I actually tried to talk to a number of folks that people told me to network with, and they had all left academia, and then they were like, I hate industry, and they went back. And so I know for sure a lot of people can go back and do go back. I didn't want to talk to those people because I didn't want to go back. I wanted out. And so for me, I wanted to take my postdoc as just an opportunity to keep more doors open. I was at Notre Dame doing my PhD, and that's a very dry space for anything industry. There's no one around. There's AbbVie basically in Chicago, and if you can't get your foot in the door there, there's just nothing. And so what I chose to do was to go into a postdoc to be able to use that time to better refine some of my skills, get some, to Andrew's point, business skills or other skills that would be translatable besides just bench skills, and sort of hone like a bigger offering for my resume, if you will, but then also spend that time networking in an industry where there was just more industry. And so for me, my when do I go was just, I have found my job. And I spent like most of the time that I was there was like, I would spend, two-thirds to 3/4 of my week working on all of my work in the lab. And the rest of the time was just trying to network and find where I wanted to be, what I wanted to be, doing a lot of informational interviews and just trying to land that job. And so for me, it was like just when I could find it and just trying to keep everything super shored up and cleaned in the lab so that when I chose to make that move, I wasn't going to be like scrambling and trying to get everything in order. Like I just on a regular basis tried to keep it in order so I could make that move when the time was right. So for me, it was just, when do I spot that job and jump for it? So that was my benchmark, was just, I knew I wanted out, and how do I get out? Oh, one other thing I will add, if something that you guys like really like is publishing and be able to have your name out there, you don't lose that opportunity once you move to industry. I think I was told, like, I think there was just a lot of people telling me things that they didn't want me to like transition to industry. So they were trying to tell me things that were super misleading, but they were like, you're never gonna be able to schedule your own life. You can in industry, and you're never going to publish again. So you're going to fall off the radar as a subject matter expert. Not true. I have at least 2 publications coming out of Flagship, and probably another one at least coming out of here at Archer and Vitae. So you can still get your hands in the pot and still be publishing and promoting science in the industry and still have that reputation for being a subject matter expert. It does not have to come from academia, but a lot of people told me that's the only place you can do it, and they were in academia. It's not true. You can do it outside as well, in case that's something you're worried about losing out on.
Could not agree with more with everything you said, Kelsey. I have 2 publications from my ARCS review time, actually, and contributing to the clinical literature, especially if you're trying to prove that your products are actually making a clinical difference, is very important to publish. So don't ever let anybody say you can't do that, because that's absolutely a lie. I knew almost immediately, but not quite immediately, that I did not want to pursue an academic career. Let's say I was 60-40 when I started my PhD, and my advisor had just come from Myogen, which was bought by Gilead, and then they divested their Colorado labs. And so he actually became a professor afterwards. So that's another thing, like he left academia for 20 years and came back and became a professor. So you absolutely can. Maybe a pie in the sky for me is like, when I retire, I could be an adjunct professor that talks about how you can translate your skills from being in business and actually being able to apply those in your training. But I don't want to do that for another like 25, 30 years. When I was a first-year graduate student, I read a paper in Nature, and obviously we're in life sciences. You publish in Cell, Science, or Nature, and you have a golden ticket to your professorship. Mostly, it's probably changed a little bit since then, but publication in Nature said 3% of all PhD students become a tenure-track faculty member. So I ran the numbers, and I knew not only that, with even though the odds are down, you have to be political to get a academic position too. And they don't teach you politics as a graduate student. But if you know somebody who knows somebody that trained with this person at this institution where they have connections to, your odds of getting a professorship are way higher. And I didn't want to play any of those games. I didn't want to do any of that glad handing or just thinking of all of that. You have to be very lucky, and you have to be very good to be a professor. And we need those academic professors for sure. We need people to use these government funds to answer these really tough questions that industry actually isn't going to solve. But I knew that I didn't want to do any of that. So it was very early on for me, and yeah, absolutely don't regret it at all. Making that jump.
Okay. So we are just about out of time. I really appreciate everybody being here. I'm going to ask just this one last question to wrap up, which is, if you could give one piece of advice to trainees right now about the one thing they should focus on doing to make that transition, to find that first entry-level position, what advice would you give? And Hestia, I'd like to start with you on that one.
Sure. I almost hate using this word, but it's just true. You have to network, and network doesn't have to mean like feeling super kind of like slimy and like weird about, trying to like ask people for stuff. I mean, it's really just getting to know people and going to events like this or times when you can, just mingle with the community of scientists that are in your area, or even using online resources, because the more people that you know, especially that have moved into industry, the more connections you're going to have when the time is right for you to transition. So that's really the biggest thing.
Okay, Andrew.
Yeah, I guess going off of what Hestia just said, and I think Kelsey was mentioning it earlier as well, and getting a group of mentors, and you need to have, and it's not just like a mentor, and it's beyond your PhD advisor, your postdoc advisor. Getting, I think of them as the board of directors of yourself. Finding a handful of people that you can be on text level, communication with, to bounce around career ideas, whether or not they're in the direction that you're looking to go or not, but nonetheless, they have a perspective on, building out what tools you need, how, other people that you may know, may not know. That was the one key thing that I have made a big effort in my career development to get. I have like 4 or 5 people that are, they're my go-to group of career development mentors. And my first, non-research lab boss told me that, and that's been something that I've really put an emphasis on. And he also said, make sure that their mentor is also not under the academic or not within the place that you work in, finding people that you can, that are outside of your bubble.
Okay, Kelsey or Wes, you want to one parting bit of advice?
Yeah, I think we touched on it. Just try to broaden your skill set. If there's something you think you're interested in, just find a way to learn, whether it's jumping into a new organization, just sitting in on meetings, sitting in on those those big grand rounds that Wes was mentioning, just anything to show that you've demonstrated interest and tried to gather that extra skill set. You don't have to be an expert. A lot of times in industry, you're asked to know a lot about a little or a little about a lot. So if you can kind of learn to kind of invert those two and get different settings, kind of just have your hands on a little bit of information, enough to make you powerful. That's a really important thing to be able to walk into a room with. And then just don't be put off by the actual job description or job title when you go to actually apply. Every single job or company has a different name for the exact same position that's in a different company. And if there's one line item that you're like, ugh, I can't do that, I've never tried, just apply. The worst that happens is you go through and you get better interview skills because you tried it. The best thing that happens is you find out you're way overqualified or super qualified for the job, and people want to keep talking to you, or they find out, no, this is like way too entry level. We should actually place you over here because we have something else that maybe you're a better fit for. Just go for it. Just get in the room and talk to people and walk away maybe with a new contact, maybe somebody that's going to be your board of directors for yourself, even if it means you don't take that position in that company. It doesn't hurt. So just go for it when the time comes, is what I think.
Could not agree more with everybody else on the panel. Like, networking, incredibly important. Mentors, incredibly important. Expanding your skill sets, also incredibly important. Those are all things that you can do right now while you're in your training too. So the sooner you start, the better. For networking, I'll just add a little bit to that. Use LinkedIn, and don't be afraid to cold message someone. The worst they can say is no. And so the biggest thing that you can get, and as soon as you get over that's the sooner the better. Every opportunity that I've found has been through LinkedIn, and it's free. You don't have to pay for LinkedIn Premium on your graduate student or postdoc stipend. Like, you can message people and find them. I guess the differing thing I'll say is I see a trend where every business is going to turn into some kind of a tech company and have some kind of analytics division, whether it's on supply chain, manufacturing, crunching some sort of data. So if you have any, I would do any sort of analytics, statistical analysis, and build up your skill set there. And even if you're not a full-blown Python developer, if you know rudimentary Python, you're already a step ahead of the rest of everybody who's applying. And you can apply that to anything too, not just life science.
Okay. So I appreciate that. Not that, well, I should get some commission from LinkedIn, because one of the things I'll mention too is that we have LinkedIn Learning. And so if you want to learn analytics, if you want to, there's stuff that's there for you for that. But I want to thank all of our panelists today. This was great. I'm sure that this is going to be the start of some conversations, and hopefully some people will follow up with you to ask some more of those specifics. I apologize that we didn't get to all of the specific questions, some things about interviewing, things like that. Next steps in this program for folks are that they're actually going to start doing some informational interviewing with people. And so hopefully they'll take some of those questions and continue to ask, as they talk to folks in the industry about this. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I really appreciate everybody showing up today and asking questions. I thought this was a really great panel. So again, just a big thank you for that. Kelsey, what did you say here? So leave every networking meeting. Yeah, exactly. So we talk about these warm referrals, right? This is one of those things that we've added in there. So it's and because I'm a science geek on some level, it's a signaling cascade, right? I mean, it's the same thing. It's signal amplification. You apply that same approach to networking. So yes, thank you everybody for this. My guess is that you will hear from some folks in the future. I hope to stay in touch with all of you. This is great. I really appreciate your support for the event today. And with that, we'll just wrap up and call it a day. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Hopefully it was helpful.
It was for me, because you all just kind of echoed the things that I keep saying to people. So so it's nice when it's like they don't see the checks that I cut you behind the scenes for, like, here's our talking points for today. So
signal amplification then, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. Bye, everybody.